P2P remitters, Mukuru, Mama Money, SFX, ShopRite Send, they're all popping up in the market. And what they're trying to solve for is lowering the cost actually of the remittance. And they're busy playing on rates. And I think a lot of consumers, whether it's businesses or individuals, have become so well educated and versed in understanding the difference between a rate and a charge. So there's definitely, you can already see that route to markets existing. It's sort of unlocking the barriers to entry, and usually your biggest barrier to entry would be being able to pay in that country or pay out of that country. If you think about South Africa, we're spoiled with a currency that's largely liquid, right? So I think 2025 is a year where we're going to see a lot of utilization of this tick that has been developed over the last few years, and it's going to sort of double down on the flows of remittances going into Africa, but also from Africa to the rest of the world.
Welcome to another episode of ITWeb TV. Today we are joined by Cornelius Coetzee, who is the country director of Verto South Africa. Today we are going to be talking about cross-border payments, how these payments have sort of evolved over time, and the technologies that are making all these things happen. Welcome to ITWeb TV, Cornelius.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah, I understand you've just landed from Cape Town. Yes. Is Verto just based in Cape Town, or you also have got some offices? And if you can just maybe tell us like the business that Verto does.
Sure. So yes, Verto South Africa is based in Cape Town. We've got our offices there, and then obviously we manage all the operations into the South African or SADC region, as it were, from that office. I mean, maybe to start off with Verto, or how it actually come to be is two ex-Nigerians living in the United Kingdom. They were both in banking. So Anthony and Ola, absolutely stunning people, who's got wealth of experience in tech stacking and obviously in remittances. And they both around a game of poker actually realized that there's a lot of synergy in terms of how they operate and what they could maybe capitalize on to build a business which eventually evolved into Verto. So that's sort of the birth of Verto. The foundation of Verto is facilitating remittances for businesses, predominantly from the UK to Nigeria. And so by default, our headquarters are in London in the United Kingdom, where we are regulated by the FCA. And then subsequently, we have set up offices in Nigeria. And then we've basically built out in the big four economies, if you can put it in Africa. So we've got a office set up in Nairobi as well, looking after the East Africa corridor. And then most recently, we have begun our process of setting up our business in the UAE. That's sort of covers for the Middle East and for North Africa. So that's basically where Verto started out. Currently, we've processed over 12 billion US dollars for businesses globally. And obviously within each of our jurisdictions, we've got the appropriate licensing to sort of get that banking partnerships involved and then utilizing that banking rails and partnerships to facilitate seamless cross-border remittances. And ultimately, that is what Verto is. We're a seamless platform and an ecosystem actually for businesses to remit funds within Africa. We pride ourselves in really delivering on exotic currencies such as Nigerian naira, Kenyan shillings, Tanzanian shillings. ZAF is something that's a hot topic at the moment that we're also busy pushing. And then obviously out of South Africa, the ZAR is probably one of the most liquid currencies in South Africa. Or in Africa. So that's basically where we've set up our basis to really service the clients. And after about 6 years, we've actually managed to get to a business solution where we can facilitate cross-border remittances in up to 49 currencies, whereby businesses can actually hold bank accounts in respective corridors. They can receive funds like a local, which dramatically speeds up the remittance process, and then obviously helps businesses grow by default. So that's sort of where Verto comes in, and what we're busy doing in South Africa as well.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Cornelius. Before this conversation, I mentioned to you that I'm from Zim. First days when I came here, for me to be able to send money home, I would have to go maybe find a bus driver, give him some money, we count, we put it in an envelope. Then he also takes his card from there. Sometimes some people would say the money was lost along the way and things like that. So how has these cross-border payments evolved from that? Are people still sending the money with bus drivers? I know there are a lot of fintech companies that have emerged in the last decade or so. Like, how has this industry kind of evolved over this time?
No, it's a very good statement, and something I'm extremely passionate about, because I mean, at the end of the day, what are we trying to solve for, right? Financial inclusion doesn't just mean helping countries or a select few of a cohort to have access to formalized remittances. I think from an informal remittance flow, I think that is still something that's going to be very much present in Africa, predominantly because we've got illiquid markets. I mean, if we're currently looking at the state of the Malawian kwacha, it is extremely difficult to get funds out of the country or funds into the country. Where there's illiquidity, or where there's instability, if I can put it like that, there's always going to be a sort of level of informal remittance play. And I think what most remitters, and sort of if you look at it from a South African play, authorized dealers with limited authorities like your Makurus, your Mama Moneys, your SFX, your Shoprite Sends, they're all trying to, and if you go wider, your M-Pesas of the world, they're all trying to formalize this in a way. So I think the evolution of that is now you can actually instantly send money by just dialing a USSD code. I think that's where it's sort of started out as a way to formalize those flows. You know exactly, I'm going to go pay this funds here in South Africa. My mother in Malawi is going to get that money because she's going to get a code. So it's a safe and secure remittance that's taking place. And I think the evolution of that, and COVID played a massive role in it. And I think COVID actually helped speed up the process of digitization, where now you need to go as contactless as possible, right? And I mean, we've all been through that period where you need to socially distance, but at the end of the day, your route to market for remittance still needs to be formalized in a way. So I think that is where remittances have evolved into a place where first we started off with bus drivers hoping to get the funds across the border and hoping that it lands at the right recipient, into USSD, into WhatsApp now being utilized as a payment mechanism, or sort of creating an order and in session paying for those orders. And then it evolved into apps. So now we actually see this ecosystem being built out where your younger guard, I would rather call it like that, they want to use an app. They want to have a one-size-fits-all solution. And I think that's sort of where we're seeing remittances getting towards, where we no longer will most likely, I think cash is still very much king in Africa, but there is a high demand for contactless payment. So can I pay with Apple Pay? Can I pay with Google Pay? Can I save my card details on this app and it automatically deducts the funds? So sort of easing that route to market, that's sort of where I'm seeing the digitization of remittances going. And I think the speed at which it's currently transforming is amazing. I think we're already in a space where you can, at a click of 5-6 buttons, you've got a remittance landing in a different corridor. So that's definitely a very strong evolution of remitting across Africa and globally as well.
Interesting that you mentioned these digital wallets like your Google Pay, your Apple Pay. How are you seeing the adoption? Is it growing, or do you see it actually like overtaking cash? As you said, cash is still king at the moment.
I think in the African context, I think cash will, to a very large extent, always be king. I mean, if you think about in South Africa, you're starting to see I don't want to say gradual shift. I think it's more intermediate, so it's actually moving a bit faster. But I think if you go 6 years back, we all still used our cards to tap and pay. Now everybody uses Apple, Samsung, Google Pay for transactions. You don't really see anybody taking out cash anymore. I mean, if you walk into a well-known retailer in South Africa, they'll tell you, listen, we're cashless. This is cashless tills, and sort of that's sort of what you're seeing happening now in terms of everyday usage. We're seeing a lot of movement away from cash or actual cards as payment mechanisms. And I think in the remittance space, there is a very large, I think if we go outside the borders of South Africa, if you think about countries like Kenya, which got your M-Pesa switch, you've got Uganda with Momo and Airtel Money, the same with Zambia. There's where mobile wallets are actually the predominant payment gateway for consumers. There's solutions now in place where those wallets are also plugged into let's call it a remittance service. So at the end of the day, you can now get a two-factor notification or authentication notice that you need to just put in your MTN Momo or your Airtel PIN and you're done. I mean, if you think about Samsung Pay, Apple Pay, Google Pay, everything works with facial recognition. So it's together with that contactless payment mechanism, it's also super easy for businesses or individuals to really transact with ease.
And maybe also, like I was thinking, Africa is quite vast, and we also have got huge diaspora, people living away from their countries of birth. So are you seeing like a big opportunity in terms of these cross-border payments in Africa, or is the same as other parts of the world? For example, in the UK, where you said the company was founded, are Africans also sending money to those countries, or is usually vice versa, countries people sending money back to Africa?
Well, it's an interesting. I think if you think about it from let's sort of with a global perspective, right? I think we know that the African diaspora in the US, in the UK, in Europe, definitely send money back into South Africa. I think there's a lot of flows. I think recently I had a look at the latest Pew Research data, which literally can show you the corridors, the most popular corridors that's moving from Europe into Africa. So there's definitely a lot of funds moving into South Africa, into the East Africa, especially Kenya. US Kenya is busy really increasing over the last few years. So I really think there's a lot of inflows going into the country. But then at the same time, I think from a South African perspective outwards, there's an immense growth in remittances. And traditionally, you would have seen your Malawis and Zimbabwe's being your top corridors out of South Africa. And now all of a sudden, you are seeing corridors like Mozambique, Botswana, East Africa is extremely popular. There's an immensely fast-growing trade corridor between South Africa and Kenya, for that matter. And naturally, that's sort of where me and my counterparts in the East African community work very closely together to find ways in which we can sort of help grow those flows, because the demand is there. And I think intra-Africa, a lot of flows exist, especially for businesses. If you take individuals away and you just look at businesses, there's an immense amount of cross-pollination between the sort of, how can I say, your SADCs and your West Africas, your SADCs and your East Africa and West Africa. So there's definitely, you can already see that route to markets existing. It's sort of unlocking that barriers to entry, and usually your biggest barrier to entry would be being able to pay in that country or pay out of that country. If you think about South Africa, we're spoiled with a currency that's largely liquid, right? But if you go into different markets outside of South Africa, it's very much illiquid, and that's sort of where we need to solve for businesses within SA, within the UK, within the US, and then obviously also within South Africa, or within the African community as well.
I also wanted to check with the currency volatility that we are experiencing across Africa. I'm sure the Nigerian naira went down recently. What sort of challenges does this present to a company like Verto, this continuous currency fluctuations or devaluation of local currencies?
I think that is where we've actually got our strong point. I think currency fluctuations directly affects businesses trading across different corridors. And where Verto comes into play is that we actually solve for that currency risk exposure, if you want to call it that. So our rails that we've set up in the various markets, and if you think about Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, it's one of the top three. I mean, without Egypt, that's your top three economies and also fastest growing economies in Africa. So our ability to manage liquidity fast is something that we sort of have to double down efforts on. So that's our core play, is to make sure that as we receive inflows into the country respective corridors with the respective currency, we need to make sure that we move those funds as quickly as possible. And that's where our sort of our unique value proposition comes in, where we can move funds for you within 24 hours. The risk exposure dramatically reduces. If you think about a remittance that takes about 5 days, permitting that all the documentation is correct, you will be able to only receive funds in 5 days. Now, a lot can happen in various corridors. I mean, overnight in Malawi, a devaluation was announced. If you think about a trade that was booked yesterday, 5 days later, there's a completely different outcome. So it's very much in Verto's ecosystem. Our core focus is on getting funds from the sender to the recipient within a T+1 or T+2 settlement lead time, to ensure that you greatly reduce that exposure, because at the end of the day, Verto is also exposed to that. And we've got a very, very well-versed team in that specific space that really just focus on making sure that liquidity is there at the best possible rates, so that we can ensure that we can deliver a service to businesses.
And how much do you charge, like, as obviously you're also going to take your portion from the transaction, maybe from here to Zimbabwe. So how much do you charge, like?
Absolutely. So, and it's a very good question, because it's also one of our unique value propositions, is that we focus on transparent pricing. So regardless if you're in Kenya or in South Africa, and you go onto Verto's website, the pricing will be there, and that is the pricing that we charge. So from a South African perspective, we do not charge more than 1% on a transaction. We do not have any additional charges that we add to that transaction. So we really make sure that we've got open and transparent pricing, and then it can go down as low as 0.4% on a transaction. It's all dependent, obviously, on the volume and the use case for the respective client. So if you want to move funds from, let's say, for argument's sake, from South Africa to the United Kingdom, you've got a supplier that you need to pay there. We can ensure that the funds move within 24 hours. So that's the first unlock, if I can put it like that, for clients. But then at the same time, we will not charge you more than 0.95% on that transaction. And you've already seen what your recipient is going to get. You've already seen the rate that has been presented to you, and we'll stick to that rate. And that's sort of one of our value propositions that we're extremely proud of, and if I might say so, boasts about, because you need to be transparent in any market that you trade in.
Awesome. And there's a lot of fintech companies that I imagine targeting this remittance market. I understand the mobile operators are also entering this space as well. How is competition in this market, and maybe who are the biggest players in this?
Sure. I think if we think about Africa as a continent, as one massive market or force to be reckoned with, in my mind, is largely untapped. I think there's so much more to do. I mean, I think Mackenzie mentioned the other day is about we expect remittances, B2B remittances, to hit $1.7 trillion out of the continent. It is a largely untapped market. So there's obviously a lot of players coming into the market. What we're seeing with the MNOs, like the M10s, the Airtels, the M-Pesas of the world, they are moving into business payments or business solutions, which is a natural progression for them, although the core business will always remain, I would say, consumer bank or consumer transacting, and sort of facilitating P2P remittances in a domestic and obviously from an IMT perspective. But I think there's a lot of unlocking to happen in the market over the next few years, and I think it's also to do with what your value proposition is going to be. So what do you actually sell? What is the product that you're going to give to the market? Is it a virtual account? Are you opening up global accounts? Are you opening up local accounts? How are you championing exchange control regulations in various markets? So that's sort of where I think the market is going to head to. I think in terms of big players, obviously, Flutterwave is obviously a $3 billion valuated company that's been a big player in the market. But we also see is aggregators coming into play, that's sort of helping with off-ramping, last mile delivery. So the Tunes, the Honor Freaks of the world, P2P remitters, Mukuru, Mama Money, SFX, ShopRite Send, they're all popping up in the market. And what they're trying to solve for is lowering the cost actually of the remittance, and they're busy playing on rates. And I think a lot of consumers, whether it's businesses or individuals, have become so well educated and versed in understanding the difference between a rate and a charge. What the effective is, what is the effective amount going to be that's going to end up in my relative's wallet or in their cash in hand, for instance. So it's starting to become a healthy competition in my mind. I think where a lot of remitters used to charge a certain fee, and it was relatively high because they only had, let's say, one or two other smaller competitors in the market. Having more competitors in the market is actually super exciting, because now we're busy working on lowering price, extending or expanding our actual ecosystem and our product offering to the client. So I think it's a very, very interesting time to be in the remittance space, and I think it's going to rapidly grow. I think there's enough cake for everybody to have of it, but it's all about how do you deliver to the client, and that's sort of how it's going to help you capitalize on those flows.
So does a company like Verto has partnerships maybe with the mobile network operators like your MTN to facilitate this?
100%. So a very good question. I think in certain markets, yes, we will partner up with certain service providers, whether it's MNOs or whether it's aggregators for that matter, to help us with last mile delivering. What we do as a sort of as a basis, if you think about it in South Africa, is we're a authorized financial services provider. We are backed by a bank. So and as our authorized dealer, they basically provide us with the rails to do EFT transfers into accounts and moving funds out of accounts. So that's sort of, I think South Africa is a very interesting market with mobile money. It's MTN has tried quite a few times to enter the market and really capitalize on it. And I think we're still very much on the card adoption, and we're moving away more into digital banking, as it were. So I think it's South Africa's unique market. But if you think about Kenya, for argument's sake, M-Pesa is sort of the holy grail in terms of moving funds. So for us as Verto, we need to focus on, is that the right partnership then to partner up with an M-Pesa to facilitate those type of transactions. And certain markets in the UK would predominantly want to have banking services. So they want to do EFT in, EFT out into bank accounts. They don't want to work with cash. They don't want to use wallets. So it depends. From a Verto perspective, we'll look at and assess each market and also the community around it. So East Africa, SADC, West Africa, North Africa, Middle East, and sort of understand what is the preferred way in which customers would like to transact. And then we'll utilize that from a B2B play to expand our partnerships to facilitate seamless cross-border remittances.
Awesome. Thanks, Cornelius. I'm also thinking like the adoption of technology in Africa, especially like if you think of devices like smartphones, the penetration is not yet that high in comparison to other regions. Is that also in any way affecting the remittance market? Or maybe another question that I'm also thinking of is sending money maybe to my grandmother who is not as tech savvy. So how do you go around that lack of the adoption of that technology?
Sure.
And people who are not that tech savvy?
Sure.
Continent?
Very good question. I think we sort of touched on it very lightly earlier, where we've said sort of the evolution of remittances, as it were, right? So traditionally you would have put it on a bus, right? So there was no need for a mobile phone. You would most likely drop an SMS back in the 90s to your relative to say it's on bus 1, 2, 3, 4, and you need to go collect it there.
Yeah.
I think that gradually moved into, if you want to sort of split smartphones versus feature phones, right? Your feature phone solution was already catered for. And you sort of see that in key markets where there's an app still available, but clients prefer to use a USSD code or USSD string. So I think USSD is already there for a solution for especially on P2P remittances, so you can still utilize that. You know, you have to dial *132 *15 or whatever, and you know you're going to get to a person's name you need to select and the amount you want to pay. So it sort of caters for that lack of tech savviness, as it were, and sort of focuses a lot on the older guard where they still believe in keeping an old phone or having an old phone or having only access to that would give them the ability to still be part of the remittance ecosystem. So I think across Africa, USSD is still very much a strong play. I think in more developed markets, you're starting to see like the Kenyas and the South Africas, and especially Zambia. I've recently seen a huge uptick in smartphone usage, right? So, and they'll still keep this feature phone. There'll always be two phones in the hand, but there's an app available for it, right? So it's sort of what I'm accustomed to using, and that's sort of where I'll stick to it. So I think we've already catered for that from a inclusion perspective. I think migrating into the digital space would predominantly become a more preferred option. But it's interesting times. You don't know how the market is going to sway. I never thought that Samsung Pay and Apple Pay would really get that immediate adoption that it did in South Africa. And amazingly, it's a great way to pay. I don't even think I know where my bank card is at the moment. I know it's on my phone. So I think that's sort of where the market is moving. But yes, I think we're already catering for both sides. I think from a business to business remittance perspective, that's where it becomes a bit more tricky, right? Because in terms of regulation, you need to supply supporting documents for that transaction to take place. So although there's an app available for it, and in our ecosystem, we've got an app available so you can quickly do a trade on the app. But the majority of users will still go onto their MacBook or their laptop, and they will log into their ecosystem or their platform, and they will be able to book trades, upload documents, etc., etc. So it's all dependent on, I think, from a remittance space, P2P or peer-to-peer remittances. That's very much catered for in USSD, and there will be a gradual move into digital spaces for that. So by means of apps, etc., etc. And then from businesses, I think the natural progression would be moving from a web browser-based into an app-based solution. So, if you think about it, all remitters actually do have either the app or the web-based solution. So I think we're at the forefront in the continent of solving payment problems, because we've got such a diverse continent and so many hurdles to overcome with your neighboring countries, etc., etc. So there's definitely a lot of movement in the market in the right direction in my mind.
Awesome. I'm also thinking wherever there is money flowing, there's also people lacking to take advantage of the money that is going in and out. How is, and actually someone who spoke at the just ended ITWeb Security Summit, I think she's from Kenya, she mentioned that cyber criminals are also looking to exploit these flourishing cross-border payments. Are you also witnessing that?
I think what we, personally from a Verto perspective, I think we've got one of the most robust. I think there's always room for improvement. Always. I mean, there's new technology coming in, but we pride ourselves as a unique value proposition to have one of the most robust compliance frameworks and tech that we're using to safeguard our clients' funds. To be quite frank, we haven't really seen any. I mean, you always get attackers. I think it's happened with every business, but I think we've got the right sort of processes and tech systems in place to safeguard client funds and immediately pick that up. And I know a lot of remitters in this space really focus on how they can safeguard client funds, because it's first and foremost your obligation to make sure that the funds land in the intended recipient's either wallet or bank account or virtual account. So I think what most businesses sort of focus on initially is, do you know who is sending money? Do you know who's receiving the money? And safeguarding that whilst having tech systems in place to safeguard the actual flow of remittance. So we've got extremely slick but still stringent KYB verification. So we want to verify our client, the nature of their business, understanding what they do, making sure that they are fully vetted and verified, so that we can ensure that that the transactions happens in good faith. Whilst having those robust systems in place, then you've got your second stream where you actually have to have tech blockers in place so that you can avoid the risk of being attacked. And I think a lot of companies in the past never really focus on making sure that they've got all their procedures and firewalls in place to make sure that they avoid the risk of being hacked or funds being lost in the process. And what I've seen with us is being more proactive and preemptive, and sort of trying to hack your own system and trying to break into your own system to understand where your flaws are and constantly try and fix that. So I think that's something we pride ourselves in, having a proper compliance and risk management framework from the get-go. So whether it's client-based or whether it's transactionally based, we do ensure safeguarding as a top priority.
Awesome. Thanks, Cornelius. Lastly, just maybe looking ahead, maybe into 2025, where do you see the cross-border payment market heading to, and maybe which technologies do you think will have the biggest impact in this market?
It's a very good question because I think, honestly, I think the market is, how can I say, the post-COVID market is sort of over and done with. I think we've taken the last 4 years in the continent, in South Africa, to really bounce back. I think there's a lot of technology-based solutions that has come into play over the last 4 years. I mean, like I mentioned, we can service in South Africa, we can service a full end-to-end contactless remittance or transfer of funds or payment for businesses without having to see a person or having to touch a person. Everything is digitized. So I think there's a sort of a massive leap that was made in the last 4 years, and sort of bouncing back from an economic standpoint. I think also what we've seen now with the government of national unity and the world actually positively reflecting on South Africa, for that matter, looking at working together to grow the economy, other corridors such as your Kenyas and your Nigerias. There's a lot of work being done to make sure that there's prosperity in the economy, but also by default then have a facilitation of B2B remittances. So I think 2025 is a year where we're going to see a lot of utilization of this tech that has been developed over the last few years, and it's going to sort of double down on the flows of remittances going into Africa, but also from Africa to the rest of the world. It's an interesting market that or sort of global economy that we're currently in, given certain presidential elections, certain tariffs that has been imposed on major players in the market. So very keen to see a lot of flows coming in through the BRICS corridors. I think BRICS is going to be an amazing play for us for 2025. So I really see it moving in the right direction. I really see a lot of players, like we mentioned, coming into the market, fighting on price, fighting on product offering, fighting on accessibility, and it's healthy competition at the end of the day, and it's all to the benefit of the underlying clients. So I definitely see a lot of movement in the market for the next year.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Cornelius, for coming to our studio and having this great discussion that we have just had. That was Cornelius Coetzee, who is the country director at Verto South Africa. I hope you enjoyed this discussion, and please don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel.